Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the True Life Podcast. We're here with the one and only Cole Butler. You may have seen him working on some clinical trials. You may have seen some work that he's published. You may have given him a call and gotten a free consultation from Lionheart Wellness. You may have seen him on LinkedIn, or wait for it, you might be on the wait list to get his brand new book, Love, Pain, and Divinity. Cole Butler, I'm so excited to talk to you, and I am so thankful you're here. How are you, my friend?
I'm good, man. Thanks for having me back. It's super cool. The last podcast you had me on, we were talking about poetry, and at the end there, we were like, gosh, I should publish that book finally. And man, that kind of set everything in motion. I attended a webinar with Randall Hansen, our mutual friend
Yep.
and author. About the publication process, and it just illuminated me to all the work that goes into that. And I just said, well, what if I already have a manuscript and I just want to throw it out there? Anyway, that started the downstream cascade of figuring out the self-publication process. And yeah, it was a lot easier, just putting together the manuscript and having something ready to go. And so anyway, one thing led to another. Now it's available online. I'm getting my proof copy in tomorrow. Everything should look good, but I'll just double check once I have that book in person and say we're good to go. But it's available for sale right now on lulu.com at Love, Pain, and Divinity. You just search for it. So super exciting. And then once I proof check it, it will be available, I believe, on the major retailers, Amazon and all that stuff. So super wild. It's crazy to even say that out loud. So yeah, I'm stoked.
Yeah, I'm stoked, and I think that a lot of other people are going to be stoked when they get to peer in there. And for some people that may be friends with you on LinkedIn, I think there are a lot of people who are not a stranger to the way in which you write. And I think that you already have a customer base with a lot of those people. I think that you have a way with words, which leads me to one of my first questions. One of the first questions I was thinking about as I was thinking about the conversation today is, was there one early experience, or can you share an early experience with us where you realized that language had power?
Oh man. Yeah. Well, part of me feels like I always felt that way. Actually, you know what? Actually, something comes to mind. Being an undergrad at community college, I was kind of for lack of better words, a shithead teenager with divorced parents, and
Yep.
on a path of destruction and rebellion. And I guess it's maybe not that words have power, but that my words were good. And I had never considered it before, which led me to look at the value of my own words and writing capability. So I had an English composition 1 and 2 professor, and I was in community college in my hometown, just struggling. And we had to write essays and things, and this guy, he was just so passionate about reading and writing, and he had that infectious passion. And I just had to write some essays for his class, and I didn't think I was doing anything crazy or revolutionary or anything, but he just told me, hey man, this is really good, I just wish you would write more. And I was really just trying to get my assignments done and whatever. And that kind of made me realize wow, he actually thinks I'm kind of good at this. And then similarly, I did 2 years at community college and then transferred to university. And when I switched my major to psychology, I took a philosophy course, which I was fascinated by. I was blown away, intro to philosophy, in my junior year. And we had these TAs, and one of them, I would sit in his kind of extra class because it was for people that didn't understand it in the main class. You go over things more. Anyway, he graded my exams, and I remember in one of them I got a 98, and he just said, like, man, like, this is really good. I don't remember exactly what he said, but he said, I think he said, consider taking more philosophy classes. So I just recognized on these written essays, I would go home and I'd look at the arguments and I'd practice the questions. I'd type everything out. And that as philosophy, like, struck me. And so then I took a course on philosophy of physics, specifically the measurement problem in quantum mechanics, which was fascinating, like a 7-person class. Maybe nobody cared, except me and one other guy. One day it was just me and one other guy and the professor. And it was like, wow, this is what's going on here. And then I also took a philosophy course in contemporary ethical theory, which was really cool. I got to learn about modern theories of ethics. But anyway, those kind of things were really inspiring to me with writing. And I really saw through that just ideas and writing about them. And I started to realize that, yeah, I kind of have a weird way with words. And so, yeah, it's been interesting, as you alluded to, how that translates on LinkedIn, and how, I'm kind of finding my particular writing style, my kind of platform for what I write and my audience. So it's been really cool to see.
Yeah, it's always interesting to me to ask that question, because I feel like it does build a good foundation, or at least you get to maybe pull back the curtain and see a little bit of how the gears are turning together and stuff. And I may know the answer to this one, or I may not, but I thought it would be a good question for the audience. And
Okay.
do you view writing as a kind of spiritual practice?
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, it depends too, like, it's funny. I'm just coming off of getting some super critical feedback, harsh feedback on a scientific manuscript that I've been working on for a year and a half. And one of my professors, he just ripped it to shreds and said, I didn't read past the intro. This is terrible. Take my name off the paper, basically. And I'm like, Jesus, like, I thought I was a good writer. But anyway, I say that to draw the fact that there are many different types of writing. And I feel like I tap into a different energy depending on the type of writing I'm doing. So, as you and I talked about on the last podcast, there's this kind of poetic headspace that I go into where I just kind of let the words flow out of me. And then, there's technical writing where I'm having to read a bunch of papers and try to translate that and understand, like, cell biology and, like, the different theories of psychedelic brain action, and just tease all that apart and put it into something, comprehensible, and into an argument structure. And that's just a totally different kind of writing. And that's not a spiritual practice. And then, there's my kind of journaling, which can be, it sort of taps into spiritual practice. I can sit there and journal for a long time, but it's also like processing in this sort of mechanical sense, like taking these ideas and putting them down, and just kind of like letting my brain really, like, clarify information. And then there's the real deep, to me, spiritual writing, which I really, like, hold as sacred. When I'm really struggling and I really need guidance, I'll sit down and I'll take a few deep breaths and I'll say a little prayer to, like, really let, what needs to come through, and I will sort of let the words take over. It's not what I want to write. I'm figuring out, I'm just kind of letting my hand flow or type. And I don't even remember where I quite picked that process up from, but that's a really deep sort of spiritual writing, and I can really tap into something outside of myself and get some, critical guidance. And I'm always blown away when I do that kind of writing, because what comes back to me is just really, magical. which I think I kind of, tapped into that in some degree in this book with some of the poems. The last one, especially, I think was Transmission, and is sort of this divine information transmission, which, I try to kind of, I don't even want to say I tried to, but, some of these poems are reflections of this connection, I would say, which is kind of what gets into the last section there, Divinity. I kind of classed all these poems into what I thought they fell into. It wasn't planned out. I just looked at all my poems and I said, these ones are related to like love, and these ones are related to pain, and these ones are related to divinity. And then I just kind of like sorted them out and put them in different categories.
Yeah, it's when I read the title, I really liked the title. I really liked the book. And I thought to myself, there's a weird sort of thread that runs through all those things: love, pain, and divinity. Is that, can you talk a little bit about the title? Like, is that what you were thinking when the title came up, or was these just 3 sections of your life, or 3 things that you felt the most? But what was it that really struck an accord with you, this title?
Yeah, well, it came out of what the book was in a way. Like, after our last podcast, like I said, I went through all my poems and I just kind of copied and pasted them into a document. And as I was doing this, a few ones got pruned out of there, ones that I'd already used or that didn't quite fit the theme or whatever. And I looked at what was left over, and I kind of saw that, some of these were related to some kind of emotional processing I was doing, trying to find love and connection and relationship, and a lot of struggles, different relationships that were really like difficult, and just trying to process through and feel through all that. And so, a lot of the poems I would just write had to deal with that. That was my sort of deeper emotional processing. And then also, sometimes I would write a poem because I'd be in a really like dark headspace, and like recently is just pretty dark, but an ex-girlfriend of mine, her name was Bailey Toth. We dated about 7 years ago. And after we broke up, she dated a couple of these guys in my hometown and had some kids. And about a week ago, she was murdered. She was shot and murdered by her husband, and she was pregnant too. Just devastating, And then he shot and killed himself right after murdering her. And man, it's just like stuff like that takes you to such a dark place, and similarly, some of the poems in this book, one of them is about the shooting in Uvalde, Texas. And it ends with kind of, where was our hero? To capture, what I was going through, hearing about these 21 children involved in this school shooting, who didn't have a hero. Who these cops, they all kind of stood back and nobody would go in, and it lasted like an hour, and it's just like terrible, man, terrible. So, some of these poems are kind of processing through some of these difficult emotions. I also had one of my best friends, Cody. His dad died from COVID, and he was like 53, no complicating conditions, probably not in the best health, but no like on paper conditions. And he died of COVID. And so one poem, I believe I called it Pandemic, was about that. And it ends with a man tragically dying alone in a room. So yeah, this isn't all bright and springy, it's that's kind of the pain section. And then Divinity is kind of like also that like tapping into the other side, something I'm fascinated by, the other side of life, the mystical, the ethereal. And so, a lot of those poems are just kind of like, tapping into that. I think the theme of sacredness comes up a lot in Divinity and secret treasures and things of this nature. And so, that section kind of covers a lot of that. And then so I realized in writing all these down that, I wasn't trying to, but a lot of my poems were fitting into these three categories as love, as pain, and divinity. And so that's how the name came about. And then, I think over the whole, there's sort of a story arc in the kind of traditional story sense of like things are good and then something goes wrong. And then like you're kind of caught up in the drama of like what's happening. And then at the end, there's like a reunion. Sometimes in the case, I guess, of a comedy or something positive, or in the case of a tragedy, not so much, something terrible happens. But I think, having this structure of kind of like stepping in with love, and then the pain is kind of the difficulty, and then divinity is kind of a return to the divine. And so sort of the arc, I guess, is that, there's this connection, and then there's this anguish, and then there's a reconnection to something greater than. And, through a lot of my struggles and strife in my personal life, whenever something goes wrong, it kind of calls me back into my spiritual practice and like says, I need to beef this up because I need a way to like get through this, something to lean on. And so that's kind of what that is, I guess. And sort of also within the love section, there's a meta narrative of, like I said, these relationships that I was struggling with, and kind of, just going from when I really thought like I was obsessed with this girl, and it just totally took a nosedive, really, and then had these other relationships and they weren't going anywhere, and then found my current partner, Shin, and we decided to have a baby together, and she's totally just like my person. And so at the very end of that chapter, it's sort of a tribute to my daughter on the way. So there's kind of that meta narrative in that first chapter, and then the kind of overall narrative. Yeah. So it just kind of arose, I guess, which is awesome.
That is awesome. I've heard a lot of people say, and there tends to be a narrative around author's first book, and they say usually an author's first book is autobiographical. And it sounds to me like, how much do you think that this particular set of poems is an autobiography of Cole Butler's life?
Yeah, and in a sort of removed way, in a sort of emotional, ethereal way, for sure. I've talked with you before about my career transitions and working on clinical trials. This is not a documentation of that, but, certainly, the more personal side of my life. And, I didn't really have an audience in mind for all these poems when I wrote them. It really was sort of my own, trying to tap into something else, trying to express my creative side, trying to deal with difficult emotions, or tap into something beautiful and magical. So that side of myself, certainly, that, has unfortunately been repressed in the professional space very much, kind of gets its moment to shine. And I think that's what's really, I think a lot of what the world needs right now is a sort of reconnection, rekindling with that divine element, or the artistic side, the sort of other side of life. And, there's not a whole lot of space right now in the professional realm for those kinds of things. And so, but that's kind of a somewhat private and personal experience that I've gone throughout my also trials and tribulations of trying to make money and trying to, make a name for myself and all that stuff. So this is kind of the behind the scenes almost autobiography. And yeah, if you kind of understand what's going on in me writing this and the kind of story behind how all this came about, and what I was going through, I think that kind of puts the context to sort of see, who I am behind, writing these poems.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's like, have you ever seen those pictures? It's like they take a picture of something and then you can either speed it up or slow it down. It's usually like a nature picture. But like reading some of this and just seeing everything you're doing is like watching a flower unfold and like just boom, like this radiant beauty. Like, whoa, look at this thing's blowing up. It's so beautiful. I really admire it. And it makes me think about, my mind goes to pilgrimages somehow. And when a lot of authors write books, sometimes they'll go on a pilgrimage to be inspired, or sometimes the work actually feels like a pilgrimage, or sometimes people go inward for a pilgrimage. I'm wondering, was there any sort of pilgrimage that you took in order to be inspired by this book?
Yeah, well, I'm from a small town, Hot Springs, Arkansas. A town of now about 40,000, I think,
Wow.
within the city limits. Really beautiful place, but not a whole lot of opportunities there. And I think, a lot of people grow up, even if you grow up in like the most awesome place, you want to get out of your hometown. There's something about coming of age there. But, in my early 20s, I'm 27 now, but in my early 20s, I was really inspired by Jordan Peterson, certainly a controversial figure now. And anyway, but he helped me a lot, really, with kind of getting my life together. And he also has this life philosophy of getting out there and conquering the dragon, and like also in the Pinocchio sense, Geppetto wishing upon a star, and I really embodied that philosophy for a long time. My life philosophy is shifting now to one that I would consider more Eastern Buddhist, present moment kind of focused. But anyway, so that was always a guide for me. And how do I orient my life? And so my sort of, dream so high, or what's the saying? Set your aim so high that you shoot for the stars and shoot for the moon, something like that.
Shoot for the stars, you'll land on the moon, I think.
Yeah. So anyway, I have always like had this vision in my mind of, honestly, I mean, it sounds somewhat conceited maybe, but of being, a star, like really having a really broad impact. And I've held myself to a standard to do that. And I have this, idea, I don't even like saying it out loud, but, that I'm going to hold myself to a different standard because I have this belief about myself that I'm capable, that I can reach further. And then that has, made me more strict with myself, and also made me like reach higher. And so, probably the main thing was getting out of Arkansas, and going to Maryland, which was kind of like, the desert, I would say, in a lot of ways, or Mordor, or whatever theme you want to apply. There was a lot of pain and suffering trying to like reach my goal, which my major goal was PhD, but then I set it even higher. I like really clearly said I want to be a professor in a university studying LSD and the treatment of substance use disorder. And so, I mean, within that, there's so much breaking down of the cultural paradigm. Not only getting into a PhD, which like the one I applied to and didn't get into recently, there's 300 people that applied for 5 spots that were open. And that's pretty standard amongst any PhD program. And so anyway, the point is that I continue to try to reach for, a PhD, but then also a psychedelic PhD in a university is just extremely competitive. And that took me to Maryland, where things really hit the fan. I was mistreated. I realized that it wasn't worth it. Like, I was going to sacrifice every bit of myself for a deeply flawed system. I was going to sacrifice my personal integrity and everything. And so that was a really hard journey. And then after a year, I served out my 1-year contract, went back home to Hot Springs, and then trying to get back on my feet was just terribly difficult. And and so it was like middle of the pandemic, basically like 1 year into the pandemic, or maybe 6 months, I want to say, when I went back to Hot Springs. And then so I ended up getting invited to live in Destin, Florida, which ended up happening for 5 weeks with a childhood best friend, actually 2 of my childhood best friends, Anna and Aiden. And so Anna's dad is a multi-million-dollar CEO. He has an LED lighting company that he started in the 80s. And he's just a miserable man. He's rich as hell, flashy, and just a dick, honestly. And
I know some people just like that.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of us do. So anyway, he has a $1.5 million beach home in Destin, Florida. Beautiful. So I'm sitting here in the middle of the pandemic, working remotely in Hot Springs, Arkansas, still working for the University of Maryland, actually, at this point in time. And this kind of all weaves into the book. But while I was still with University of Maryland, working remotely in Hot Springs, I went to Destin, lived in this beach home, and I got this idea in my mind after being friends with this girl Anna for 10 years, that her and I were, there was something about us. We had always kind of been attracted to one another, but we're just kind of platonic friends. But nothing ever really happened between us. I got this idea in my head that, well, wow, we've been able to keep up this relationship for so long. There must be something about this that means that, we would work as a couple or whatever. And so while in Florida, she was dating this other guy, Amos, and his dad is an ex-Goldman Sachs CEO, hedge fund manager, worth over $1 billion.
Wow.
And this guy, Amos, I mean, he's just a real fail, real kind of like, I mean, I don't know how, like, if your dad has over $1 billion, you as a young man take any responsibility, to be fair, because what's your incentive when everything is handed to you? Anyway, I'm kind of bouncing around with the story and, trying not to get all into the details, but essentially things kind of became competitive between me and Amos over this girl, Anna. And I eventually told her that, I liked her, and, nothing came out of it. She was kind of upset. She didn't want to leave her toxic relationship with this guy. But I was convinced, that we were meant to be together. And it just didn't happen. And at the end of that 5 weeks in Destin, I went back to Hot Springs and received a call one morning, and it was a death threat from Amos. And he said, "You slept with my girlfriend," which I didn't. and that he had already arranged to have my skull caved in Washington, D.C., because I was about to move back to Washington, D.C. at that point, and that basically he was going to use his dad's money to get away with it. And I just said, man, like what what the fuck is wrong with you? I tried to file a police report, but this guy was based out of New York. Nothing came of it, but I was like, these people, this is dangerous. I don't want to be associated with her. I don't want to be associated with him. And so I blocked both of them, and then I haven't spoken to Anna since, and it's been years. And like I said, she was a friend of mine for 10 years. She's also in like a bad mental headspace. But I cared about her for a long time. And yeah, and so anyway, that was like a lot of, I think, what sparked up such a visceral internal emotion, that my very first poem, which is the first poem in the book, is something that doesn't rhyme, but is like rife with emotion, which is, yeah, dedicated essentially to her, or was written thinking about her, and some of the strife that went along with that. And that really sparked my poetic journey, kind of dealing with a lot of the emotions around that. And anyway, so I went back to Washington, D.C. Right after that. That's when shit hit the fan, really. COVID, political tensions. That was Washington, D.C., like 4 or 5 months before the Capitol riots. Right before the Trump Biden reelection, the whole thing. So it was tense.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that's when I went back to Hot Springs and had all the career struggles that eventually led me to Colorado. But poetry started to become an outlet, a creative outlet, when I kind of had nothing else. Um, After I came back from Washington, D.C. and came back home. And yeah, so that kind of sparked that. And then I always kind of held on to it. I actually started an Instagram page that I quit doing, but I would write my poems with a fountain pen. I love fountain pens. I like a nice pen. I would write them in a nice notebook with a fountain pen, and I would add like some little nice crystals or gems or rocks or whatever. And I kind of stage a nice photo with some nice lighting, and I put them on Instagram. It just wasn't really the right platform, I think, for my poems. And so I stopped that. And then coming to Colorado, my career really took off. And so my time and investment in poetry kind of dwindled as I started to become more busy. But poetry still, it had sunk into me at that point, and it had become my outlet. And yeah, my tapping into, like I said, a lot of these things, whether it was love or pain or divinity. So yeah, I suppose that's really what sparked it all.
That's an awesome story. It's always fun and beautiful and engaging to get to hear the pilgrimage, or get to hear an inspiration, or get to hear, the sort of call to action, or the first threshold guardian, whatever you want to put there. Is like, it's so interesting to me, and it really paints a beautiful background for the book to see on there. It brings me to this other question. Sometimes authors talk about their work is energizing, sometimes they say exhausting, sometimes it's both. Have you found your work to be energizing or exhausting, or what's your take on that?
Yeah, totally. I think it's energizing, but only because like I haven't, like, and this is kind of the intro, the foreword. It's like I really made a point of it not to make it like a job or a chore or anything like that, because I don't write poems that often, like maybe one a week or something. Or like I told you on the last podcast, if I leave one on receipt paper for a waiter or
Yeah.
waitress, maybe I do that then. But it's been important for me to not force it. To just, like, when the time feels right, when I'm inspired, to open up my notes app, that's where I write them. And I'll just write the word poem as like a standing title, and then I'll write the poem, and then I'll figure out what the title is, and then I'll attach it. But anyway, I mean, I never considered myself a poet. I mean, I guess it's fair for me to call myself one at this point. But I'm not like a professional poet, like it's not what I spend my life doing. It's been this other thing for me, which I think is also, like you were alluding to, maybe a sort of flowering or awakening into something else, like a way of tapping into this artistic side of myself. And so, yeah, I've kind of made a point, and I don't know whether this is right or wrong, to not make it exhausting, to keep that fire alive in me, and to do it when I'm inspired. And I think that's like the best headspace to be in, to write a poem, to not feel forced, but to just feel like the idea is starting to bubble beneath the surface, and then writing it. So yeah, so for that reason, it's definitely brought me energy. But I could see if I was like writing like an actual, like, autobiography or something, how it could feel exhausting. I've certainly felt that way working on my scientific papers. I really gotta motivate myself and pick myself up by my bootstraps to get those done, because I'm just not inspired. Like I'm good at it in some ways, bad in others, I guess. But it's just such a different energy, which I feel so much more, like inspired by creative writing and poetry, than some of that more like, let me sit down and hold myself really accountable and just get this done, which is also probably a sign, I'm thinking, that like maybe that's not where I meant to go with my writing, if it's such a chore and such a drag. Anyway.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. It begs the question of, maybe that's why there's so many things wrong, whether it's in anything, whether it's in your daily life, or whether it's in science, or whether it's in different types of testing for different types of substances. It's so much of it is a chore. And there's when something is so difficult and a chore, there's always that temptation to try to make it a little easier, whether that's cheating, whether it's, hey, I'm just throw a few bucks over here, you know what I mean? And then that sort of corruption sets in, and it does make things seem to be, I guess, corrosive in a weird sort of way.
Yeah.
I don't know. I guess let me throw this one at you and see what you think. Is that when you write, is there some sort of imagery that you see or that you think of, or how is imagery? Is there a recipe? Is there like imagery, mood, and message? Or is there some sort of recipe that you're inspired by or that you follow? Is there the Cole Butler cookbook of writing that someone could look at and want to look at? Or what goes through your mind when you're writing?
Yeah, again, I think it depends on the type of writing. Probably the poetry incorporates more imagery than some of the other stuff. One thing that's always stuck out to me that Jordan Peterson has said is that some people think in images and some people think in words. And I think in words. It's nonstop kind of stream of consciousness. Like I'm always, it's words. It is. And my grandpa is an artist. And he designed the cover for this book, which you can see
Beautiful.
here.
Beautiful. Well done.
Yeah. And he's raised in an even smaller town than me, like a logging and meth town, I could probably say, called Gurdon, Arkansas, of about 800 people. And he worked on the railroad growing up, and he started doing train graffiti back in the 70s. And mail art. So like kind of train graffiti and mail art have been two kind of critical things that he's done. And he's real kind of old school in that way. He's almost 80 now. His name is Butler, or Colossus of Rhodes, Roads, is what he goes by. And his professional Instagram page has like 20,000 followers, and in like the kind of weird niche folk art scene, he's kind of considered a hero along with guys like Bozo Texino, because he's been taken all over the world by his art. And so anyway, that's all to say that I think his work has always made like a lifelong impression on me. And my dad went to art school, even though he works with computers mainly now. But I think I've kind of had that aesthetic appreciation, maybe like genetically in life baked into me. So I've always had like a certain taste, a certain flair that gets manifested in multiple different ways. Just kind of like, I don't know, I've been into fashion, I've written graffiti for myself, I've been into modifying cars. And I've always had a certain kind of taste that I try to create, and so I think that plays a role in how I put together, these poems, and also just how I think, and also, my grandpa Butler, his writing it's just crazy. I mean, it's awesome, it's beautiful, it's like distorted, it's like so like outside of the realm of like, it's like almost doesn't make sense, but it makes sense. He has this kind of world that he lives in called Surrealville. And so he was inspired by Dadaism, by like Jack Kerouac, things like that. And so he has this real crazy sort of style of writing that's been really inspiring to me also. And anyway, as far as like imagery and text goes, I think, it's almost like a vibe that I tap into. For example, my poem Aspen Unknowing. I'll see if I can pull it up here. But anyway, let me just pull it up so I can reference it.
Maybe if you wouldn't mind, maybe you can give a taste. Maybe you can give us a little sample.
Sure. Yeah. Let me pull it up here. Sure. Now it's in the Divinity section. My Control F is not doing its job, maybe because it's a PDF. Okay. This one definitely comes to mind in terms of imagery. Nice. Okay, here we go. Aspen Unknowing. Red pine feathers fall from the walls. Blue energy drips from the waterfalls. Sunlight beams into the open pores. Healing replaces the old open sores. Tying up the unlaced shoes, untying the ends of the grooves. Total blackness meets my ends. How lovely to have one friend. Odd in my eternal purpose. Windows close the open curtains. Frequency bands unravel with time and resonate with recurrent chimes. Windfall into the new arenas, breaking down, howling with hyenas. Lots and lots and lots of patterns, crying into the darkest caverns. Where will we find the eternal stone? Can we unlock the known unknown? Kiss me, baby, on the forehead. Rip open my insides when I'm dead. Formlessness takes an unknown shape, finding my final resting place. So,
yeah,
that one's pretty intense.
Yeah, absolutely.
It kind of, I guess, that's the kind of energy, that I maybe associate with, my grandpa. And it's just kind of like you go from this like weird, like, okay, waterfalls, like trees, like cool, to like kiss me, to like rip me open. It's like, whoa. And, but with this, there's like this churning up, a vibe or an emotion or something that I'm like capturing. So, I don't know exactly. Like I can't say that like a clear image pops up in my head when I'm writing. It's more just like as I'm writing, I'm like, oh, like this thing, it just kind of like pops up, like hyenas, like waterfalls, aspen trees, like these things I'm kind of tapping into, but I'm using the words to put, I guess, form to some of that. And then also these more intense emotions, and like things that like don't quite make sense, but make sense. But anyway, I think the poem in some sense speaks for itself. It's hard to like talk about it in a way that makes sense because part of it is that it doesn't make sense.
Yeah. I wonder, it makes me wonder sometimes, when you create something and then you put it out for people to partake in or consume or read, sometimes the feedback you get from people opens up another dimension for you to see the very thing that you've written. And you're like, oh, well, you thought it like that? I never thought about it like that, but maybe it is. And in that idea, I'm wondering, is there some place, like, let's say people buy your book and they want to reach out to you because they want to tell you what they thought about that poem or how it inspired them. Is there a way for people to interact with you? Like once they buy your book, if they were like, Cole, that line about kissing the baby and then ripping me open, that made me think of kissing my daughter on the forehead and then having a nightmare. Or, is there a place where, let's say someone buys your book, can they reach out to you to talk about your book?
Yeah, absolutely. I would love that. I mean, yeah, I guess I'll say the book, like, I don't plan to make any money on it. I've only had to invest about $100 in some of my time into creating it, which is awesome. But, I had this option, like, how much money do you want to make on the book? And I said, okay, like, well, let me see here. One of the decisions I made was paperback or hardback. And I said, God, the paperback is half the price. It's like $12 for a paperback, 25 for a hardback. But I just wanted that hardcover. And like
Yeah.
the thing about it is that this is almost just to have something tangible, to put it out there. My goal is not to sell copies, really. I definitely would love and appreciate if people cared about this. Like that would feel great. But yeah, it gave me the option. How much do you want to make on this? I said, okay, $1. and and so it spits out a price. A minimum, if I made $0, was $22.94. I think was how much it would cost, and now it's going to cost $25 just to print it. And if you buy it directly from the bookstore that I published it on, Lulu.com, I think I make $10 just because it's coming direct from that. And then if it's through like Amazon or something, whenever that rolls out. I think that's when I make like $1. Anyway, so I bring that up because like I'm doing this because I find it interesting, like not to make money
Right.
or anything. So I would love if people, were able to read it, were able to interact with me, were able to give me their thoughts. And so so LinkedIn or like my email is probably the easiest way to get a hold of me. My website is lionheartwellness.net, and my email for that is colionheart@gmail.com. So totally. And I think actually my website and maybe my email is inside the book.
Right.
So or even you can mail me. I put, an address in there. You can mail me something. That'd be cool. And yeah, I guess just, more broadly, I think that when people resonate with something, it's like, oh yeah, like I thought that too. Maybe I didn't have the words, but like
Yeah.
when you use your words, that like makes me think about something that I've also thought about. And so, in a weird way, I think these poems are somewhat selfish because it's just like me and what I wrote. I didn't write them for somebody else to be like, oh, true. It's just what I had in mind. And so, I think it's out of my control once it's out there, to decide how other people are going to react, what that's going to bring up for people, how that lands on somebody. Maybe how it lands isn't what I had in mind. Again, I didn't design it with an audience in mind. It was just kind of personal. But, if that resonates in some way or is interpreted in some way, or somebody's inspired or moved or whatever, please reach out. And it's the same thing with my newsletter. I recently started a newsletter called the Psychedelic Paradigm Shift, and I've written 2 editions now and hoping to be on a weekly schedule. And at the end of those, I'm like, this isn't about just me. I can't change the entire paradigm of how we operate in the West on my own. I want it to be a community-based thing, and I want people to be inspired, but also to tell me what they think and how they view this problem. And so I appreciate people reaching out and being like, yeah, like I resonated with that, like, or I think this about it, or like, how do we change it? Like things like that. So totally, like I'm a super open book. I'm available. So if you have thoughts, please share them.
It reminds me, sometimes, as parents, as brothers, as sisters, as husbands and wives, as family, as friends, it's really difficult sometimes to make time when you're tired. And sometimes when I come home from work, like I'm totally exhausted, and my daughter comes to the door, she's like, "Daddy," and you get energized. But there's this game that her and I play, because I often don't have much time before she goes to bed. But there's a simple game that we play sometimes, and it reminds me of the idea of people interacting with you. And the game is this: you just take a piece of paper, and I'll draw a line, and then I'll push the paper to her, and then she'll draw another line, and then she'll push it back to me. And pretty soon we've built like this character or an animal or a house. But it's so interesting how just one little action that forces an interaction, and then it boomerangs back, and then all of a sudden you've created this thing. And I think about that when I was reading some of your poetry, like, wow, what a beautiful way to send something out into the world. And then I think it's on everybody else to boomerang it back. And whether it's to you, or someone loans the idea or the story to a friend, and then it just goes around. And I just think when you send stuff out like that, it's a great way to think about it coming back to you. Or maybe it's an interactive game of you give something, they give it back to you. And I just think that would be a cool thing and I really love talking to people who put stuff out there and can have it boom back to them. So that's why I kind of brought that whole thing up. As far as the newsletter, is that on Substack or?
It's on LinkedIn. I do. I like ChatGPT. Me and ChatGPT are friends. We hang out. We bounce ideas off one another. And the idea of a newsletter had, floated around in my head. But I'm like, a lot of the time in newsletter, like, I don't know if people really read them. And I was just trying to think about other platforms for writing. And so ChatGPT and I had a nice long conversation and bounced some ideas around, and I told ChatGPT, what I thought and what I was good at and what I like to do. And ChatGPT gave me some ideas, and out of that came a newsletter, and I shifted some things around and said, okay, I'll write this. And it also gave me some platforms that I could write a newsletter on. And anyway, I don't want to be like so siloed on LinkedIn. I'm trying to kind of expand my presence, but I found out that you can publish your newsletter on LinkedIn also. So it's on there right now. I don't know if you're not on LinkedIn, if you can subscribe. I hope so. I saw Randall Hansen's newsletter came to my inbox this morning, so I don't know if mine is like popping up in people's email inbox either. But yeah, right now it's on LinkedIn, but maybe I'll explore other avenues. But since the first edition got this overwhelming praise, I was really kind of shocked. I have 850 subscribers to it already. I'm like, wow. And like 30 people interacted with it, and I got all these comments. The executive director of MindMed, who's a company that I work for, reached out to compliment my newsletter. I'm like, holy crap, like I work on your study. He's like, oh, cool. And so anyway, just mind blowing. But and I published a second edition that didn't quite get as much attention or feedback, but I guess that's part of the process. But
Sure.
anyway, yeah, I need to explore how to expand it or get it to people outside of just LinkedIn. But right now, it's just on LinkedIn.
Yeah. I saw Randall's come in, but I haven't seen yours didn't come into my inbox either. I wonder if there's some sort of glitch there or it didn't get distributed for some reason.
Yeah, I think maybe it just came up in people's notifications or something. I'll look into it. I published a second edition on Saturday. But
Okay.
yeah, anyway.
Well, it's Cole. I'm super excited to talk to you, and I love the way in which you see the world and the psychedelic perspective and the idea that unites us as what more unites us than love, pain, and divinity. And I'm excited to see where it goes. But before I let you go, what what do you have coming up? Where can people find you? I know we talked about the newsletter a bit, but I think you have other platforms people can find you. And what are you excited about?
Yeah. LinkedIn is always like that's where my primary presence has unfolded, I guess. Lionheartwellness.net is the website with my contact information as well. I now have an Instagram. I'm trying to keep up with that. I don't as much. It's Lionheart Wellness Colorado, and I'm slowly trying to add on these different platforms.
Mhm.
So those are the main ways to get a hold of me. And yeah, right now, I'm writing a few more poems here and there. Our LSD study has really taken off, so I've really just kind of become like swamped and engrossed in that, which is great. And trying to develop out the newsletter, trying to kind of like figure out my identity in this world, in this space. I don't think there's a clear, like I realize that all the little check boxes of careers and life paths that society handed me when I was born,
Yep.
that I don't quite fit into any of those boxes. And so I'm trying to figure out, how to build my own box, I guess, and more to come on that. But and I guess that's kind of the extension of Lionheart Wellness. I graduate with my master's degree in 2 months, which after a few summer courses, I can start doing therapy independently, which is exciting. Um, and yeah, what am I excited about? My baby daughter. So
Yeah.
that trumps everything else. I think really. And I'm just trying to figure out how to live, how to, you know, provide for my family, for
Mhm.
myself, how to, take who I am and live and make sure everybody eats and has a nice life. So, yeah, that's what's going on.
I'm so excited for you. You're it's inspiring. I wish I was more like you when I was 27. And I think that though, you know what? I just thought of this one question. I need to run low on time, but when do
Okay.
you think in the future, as someone who has worked around clinical trials, would it be possible to measure the efficacy? I think that's the right word for adding poetry into therapy. Would it be possible to measure that? You think in some sort of way, like if after every session you would, I don't know how you would structure it, but could that fit into a clinical trial somewhere and be measured?
Yeah, I think people use poetry as a tool for integration, along with art and
Right.
movement and dance, meditation. Yeah, I think, one thing that's been really cool to hear about is like poetry workshops. I
Hmm.
think some people need a little bit of hand holding to really tap into that energy because they're a little bit nervous. Like, I'm not a poet, I don't understand. I always encourage people like just write it. Like just
Yeah.
it doesn't have to rhyme, whatever. Like just do it. And I think it's a really cool and unique and different way to tap into some different energy. So yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any way to analyze the poems, but maybe like what role did
Right.
poetry serve in your processing? And we have a long ways to go in understanding, yeah, like what do we need to do? What's the right process of integrating? And a lot of, the scientific approach is these really, black and white kind of, did your symptoms go down? Like, do all your lab tests look good? Like, how's your heart functioning? How's your blood pressure? And did your anxiety go down? Are you having problematic sexual function that went away? But I hope down the road, we can start to think about like, well, what do we need to do from a clinical perspective, and what's helpful. And I think what excites me about the clinical space, outside of just research, and now in Colorado being able to use psilocybin therapeutically, is that there's not going to be as many rules.
Right.
And so, the clinical trials are hard because there's so many rules, so much protocol, so much red tape. But when you're just working clinically, you can just do what you want. You can say like, hey, write a poem, like, and I don't have to ask, I don't have to give you a questionnaire.
Right.
Just say like, okay, well, how was that for you? Like, what? Read it back to me. What does that bring up for you? And maybe that's just another thread, and tying together their experience, and making sense of it. And in that sense, I don't really care about
Yep.
the science behind it, but also scientific validation to bolster this mysterious thing is also awesome. We've been able to do that with psychedelics. They're mysterious. We don't understand them, but we can show that they work. And I think poetry is like that too.
Yeah, that's really well said. That's awesome. Cole, the book is called Love, Pain, and Divinity. It's available on Lulu. The link to that will be in the show notes. Check out the newsletter. Check him out on LinkedIn. Reach out to him on Lionheart Wellness. The last time we spoke, you were had like a 10-minute consultation you were doing for people. Is that still available for people?
Yeah. I do 15-minute phone calls with people. Sometimes they hold over. I have limited hours right now with everything that's going on. But yeah, I'm happy to talk with people. If those hours don't work, reach out. I love just connecting with people, even if it goes nowhere. So yeah, you can schedule that on my website or reach out, and I'm happy to share my ideas with you or just have a conversation.
That's so awesome. All right, Cole Butler, thank you so much for being here. I hope you have a tremendous day. Say hello to your lovely partner, and I'm so excited for your baby and the book and everything that's going on for you, man. Congratulations, and thank you for being here today, man. I really appreciate it.
Cool, man. Thanks so much for having me back. It's always, I love these conversations. So
Yeah, me too.
So stimulating. So
yep. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, that's all we got for today. Aloha.